Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lukwesa, Burak. Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lukwesa, Burak. In a moment, we'll be taking a look at tomorrow's papers with Benedict Paviour and Graham Brown. First, a reminder of our headlines. With the US withdrawal due to conclude on Tuesday, time is running out for Afghans still desperate to leave.
Flights are almost over.
So us almost.
What are you going to do now?
So what about us? We are work with them. We support them.
The last planes carrying UK troops home from Afghanistan have been landing at RAF Brize Norton. Their arrival marks the end of Britain's 20-year military campaign in the country. More explosions in Afghanistan as the US carries out another airstrike, this time in Kabul. Officials say an imminent ISIS-K threat has been stopped. In America, Hurricane Ida has made landfall on the Louisiana coast with wind speeds of up to 150 miles an hour. Thousands of people have left their homes ahead of Ida.
This is going to be a devastating hurricane, a life-threatening storm.
Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow morning. I'm joined this evening by Benedict Paviour from France 24 and also Graham Brown from the Birmingham Mail. It's lovely to have you both with me tonight. I'll chat in a moment. First, a quick look through some of those front papers. We'll start with the Eye. The lead here is the British troops arriving back in the UK after being deployed to help the Afghan evacuation effort. The paper says Dominic Raab has been accused of leaving behind at least 1,000 more Afghans who could have been saved. The Telegraph shows a picture of President Biden paying his respects to his US servicemen who lost their lives in this week's terrorist attack in Afghanistan. The paper saying that Afghan Special Forces personnel could become a new regiment of the army, akin to the Gurkhas, under new proposals. And let's stick with Afghanistan for the front of the FT, which covers the news that the US says a drone strike foiled fresh attacks on the Kabul airlift as the deadline nears. And expanding on that story, The Times warns that the UK is now significantly less safe after the Taliban takeover of Kabul. Now that's based on the assessment of the former army commandos, diplomats and MPs. The Guardian says that Boris Johnson and other world leaders have received assurances from the Taliban that foreign nationals and those with authorization to flee Afghanistan will be allowed to leave. Moving away from events in Afghanistan, the Daily Mail reports on figures that show that in some parts of the country, less than half of patients currently see their GPs face to face. So that was a nice flavour, really, of some of those front pages. Graham, Benedict, very good evening to you. We are going to start with the FT. Benedict, you're going to kick us off with that. The front page, US says drone strike foiled a fresh attack on the airlift.
Yes, good evening, Lukwesa. And Graham. Well, yes, interesting. This another drone strike. This one is described by the US military, quote, as a self-defense airstrike on a vehicle in the Afghan capital, Kabul, that was approaching the airport. And according, again, to the Americans, it's the proof that this was indeed full of explosives is that there were secondary explosions. And the culprits behind this would-be attack, it seems, are the so-called ISIS-K, the local branch of the Islamist terror group, the very same ones who claimed responsibility for Thursday's attack that was so bloody at Abbey Gate that killed, we know, 3 Britons, killed 13 US Marines and killed, I think the toll keeps on going up, about 170 Afghan civilians. Afghan civilians and British nationals who were desperately trying to reach that gate, desperately trying to be evacuated in what has been an absolutely extraordinary 2 weeks. And despite all the, I think, quite deserved, alas, political criticism, what is very clear is the huge military effort, whether it's the British military extraordinary airlift, the biggest since World War II, the US airlift, and French military operations, which stopped in Kabul on Friday. But what this article, and we'll come on to it, I'm sure, also talks about briefly is the UN Security Council will be meeting on Monday, and there is a British-French push to try and secure a safe zone for this very important promise to continue airlifting, whether it's US, British, French and other European nationals, and of course Afghan civilians who have worked with those troops and whose lives and their families are in danger.
Graham.
Yeah, I think the FT's coverage sort of signals what's going to be the future of coverage about this now. Obviously, we've seen all of the UK military return to Brize Norton now. What we're now seeing is the sort of bloodier side of this. It's right in saying this is the second, or what would have been the second suicide attack that this time was foiled. So we're starting a new kind of chapter really in what we're going to see here. Meanwhile, obviously there are something like 9,000 people trapped in that have helped us in Afghanistan, and all hope now is that we can try to bring them out as safely as possible, and dare I say, even deal with the Taliban.
Graham, I don't know if you caught the line from the US National Security Advisor. His name is Jake Sullivan, and speaking earlier, he said that the US will continue to carry out strikes in Afghanistan, but he did reiterate that the president doesn't intend to start a new war in Afghanistan. I mean, the fact that the US are still willing to engage, as we've seen today and earlier as well, what do you make about this, discussion of a new war?
I think it's fascinating how it's going to pan out. I mean, we've all seen the statistics of the amount of former US military weaponry and transport and so on that's been taken on by the Taliban. I mean, it's sort of interesting to see what the response is to that. I mean, it's hard to say it could get worse for Biden at the moment, but I mean, fundamentally, these attacks at the moment are harming the kind of brave people who are trying to get thousands and thousands of people out of Afghanistan. So the US has got to respond. But I would have thought, sort of politically, it's such a bloody nose now that I can't imagine that Biden would be desperate to get back in there, really. I think one of the things that the West has learned from this experience is that we don't know everything. And I wonder whether or not the Americans would be quite so keen to engage in something that you might call a war.
OK, Benedict, if you could take us to the front page of the Eye. And we have the picture there with the headline, British troops arrive home, but the war goes on.
Alas, I don't have it in front of me. But what is very moving are these flights coming back with the personnel. And when you look at these faces, I was just looking at a photo just a few hours ago of the female US Marine who had said, I think it was on Facebook, that she loved her job and she was holding a small Afghan baby as she said that. And within 24 to 48 hours, she tragically died in Thursday's ISIS-K terrorist attack. What incredible emotions the various armies, US, British, French and others, must have been going through, risking their lives, we can see. What I think is important to remember is, of course, the British dead, 457, all those who've lost limbs and all those who are here back in the UK and for whom this is absolutely must be torture. And I think that MPs like Tom Tugendhat, like Tobias Ellwood in the Conservative Party, have been really voicing that anguish that they, having served tours in Afghanistan and elsewhere, are feeling incredible turmoil. I was also, as it happened, running an errand today and suddenly found myself speaking to a mother of a British soldier who had been in Iraq and who had been in Afghanistan. And she described going to see other mothers who had lost sons, as it happens, and hopes to do that. So I think if we can reach out to families who may not have seen a tour of duty just recently, but some time ago, I think we really need to be supporting them. And I do think the government needs to do much more to supporting their mental health and their well-being.
Benedict, thank you so much, considering you didn't have that front page in front of you. So I really appreciate that, because you've covered much of some of the top lines that are covered on that front page. Graham, we have that picture there with a Royal Air Force aircraft and some of the crew on or coming off, disembarking from that plane. I want to ask you about some of the criticism that has been levelled at the government today. Obviously, you heard what Boris Johnson had to say. He said, as the front page of the Eye says, they got on with the job. But when you look at criticism within the Conservative Party itself, Johnny Mercer described it as a catastrophe. The exit was shameful.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the most important thing to say is that the military forces behind the evacuation have, of course, been absolutely nothing short of heroic. But you, again, I talked about it feels like that there's a change in tide in terms of the rhetoric with regard to covering this. It also feels like that with regard to the government now, particularly Dominic Raab, has claimed that there's up to 9,000 people who could be eligible for rescue who've still been left behind. There's been some positive noise from the Taliban about them, but I think the bigger thing that's going to come to fore in Parliament this week is the decision by Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, to remain on holiday at the start of this crisis. It's been reported at the Eyes among them to say that it could cost vital days. It could have been up to 1,000 people who have not been evacuated who otherwise would be. And again, we're talking about people who've helped us out in the war, people who've been our allies. Other things that Rob's been accused of is having little contact with people in the area, particularly Pakistan, over this. You know, that in the run up to this, that there just wasn't that dialogue, and now it's kind of hit home. I suspect it's going to be quite a long week for the Foreign Secretary.
I believe that Dominic Raab is going to face questions later this week, so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say on that. The questions have been growing, haven't they? Let's turn to the front page of the Telegraph, Benedict. Afghan commandos could fight for Britain like the Gurkhas.
Yes, that's quite an extraordinary, that is, with a headline like that. That is, I think, an article that many people will want to read. Indeed, Afghan Special Forces could become a new regiment of the army, much like the Gurkhas, it's said here, under proposals that are being put forward to ministers. And apparently hundreds of commandos from Afghanistan have arrived in the UK this month after training and serving with British troops for more than a decade. Now that, I think, is quite interesting. I'll be very interested to see what the opposition has to say about that, and also how the army feels about that at a time when we've had so many army cuts. I'm not quite sure what to think about it at the time, but there's no doubt that they've been given an awful lot of training. Alas, that training was not sufficient when Americans decided to pull out, I think, with just about no consultation, and that the army was, Afghan army was just hollowed out. Yep, I think I'd like to find out more about this, and I'll need to do more homework on that one.
Okay.
Because that's quite a proposition.
It certainly is, isn't it? Graham, I wonder if you could take us to the other story we're covering. Same paper, front page of the Daily Telegraph, and that is that the Taliban, the US drone strike has killed the suicide bombers, and it shows a picture of President Biden paying tribute to the 13 fallen soldiers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a few hours on from the US. So the US have carried out this action against what it says was a group of suicide bombers who was headed towards Kabul airport. The Telegraph, I was equally sort of flummoxed by the splash, but this story seems more significant to me that the Taliban said that they welcomed the US drone strike. I don't think anyone's actually claimed. I don't think we know who the drone strike's been against yet, but all of the rhetoric seems to be around ISK, which is the Islamic State offshoot in that area, and a group who thinks that the Taliban is too moderate. So obscurely, we're trying to work out what the future relationship is with the Taliban. I thought this was a particularly interesting article because in this instance, the Taliban's on our side. They're glad that we took them out. That the US took them out, and that the fruition of this apparent suicide attack never came to pass. It is reported that there were 3 children killed in the US. In the US operation to stop this, but obviously, having seen what happened earlier on last week, that might well have been a sad price that was worth paying.
Before we go on to The Guardian, Graham, I'm just going to throw an extra question to you. It does really expose that question of intelligence, doesn't it? Yes, they've used a drone. The US have used a drone. But you wonder where this intelligence is coming from and where it will continue to come from if there are no more Allied troops on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. But then equally, given the nature of where we are now, I guess we have to question how much control we ever really exerted over this in the first place, really. Throughout this whole war, it strikes me that many in the Muslim world were warning us that this is something that couldn't be won, and that it was sort of it was built on a sort of Western arrogance and so on. Yes, absolutely. Given our hasty exit, you would think that it's going to be less clear what's happening in Afghanistan. But I don't know. It just seems to me like like we've just got a magnifying glass on some failings that have been there for quite some time.
OK, let us turn to the front page of The Guardian. The Taliban are saying that they will allow more departures as the US strikes Kabul. Now, France was part of this joint statement that was issued this evening, Benedict, on the fact that, they've had this assurance from the Taliban that if anybody wants to leave, they will be able to leave. Before we tackle the article itself, how is this evacuation being regarded in France itself?
Well, there's been equal concern, angst and gratitude that, the operations finished on Friday, that 2,600 Afghans, I understand, were part of a 2,834 people evacuated from Kabul since the 17th of August. Yesterday, you've got the diplomatic personnel, because the French ambassador, Mr. David Martinon, have only just been extracted now. They too stayed very much with French soldiers, to try and get as many people out of Kabul as possible. And very interesting, in an interview that was given by Emmanuel Macron, who's just been in Iraq, he was talking about discussions with the Taliban to allow, and I'm translating, Afghans who are at risk, to be evacuated beyond the 31st of August, this date that has been fixed by the Americans. But in another interview, it's very interesting that the French president says, do not confuse talking to the Taliban with recognizing the Taliban as the legitimate government. We need to see acts. And again, come back to the Guardian Lukwesa article, it talks about France and Britain being expected to table an emergency UN Security Council resolution. Now, France and the UK work often on issues like this together, and they clearly are, London and Paris, very much working on this together for any new Afghan government to back a safe zone at Kabul airport to allow evacuation efforts to continue. Now, it's interesting that Whitehall tonight, according to The Guardian, is claiming that the French president's comments were premature. I think that the British government was wanting to control the news a little bit more, but the French president has spoken, and clearly these negotiations are ongoing, and this UN Security Council meeting will be extremely important, and there will be a huge hope, I think, for the British nationals who have been left behind, and for the many Afghans who have been left behind, whether it's 1,000 more or less. I don't know, but whose lives are in very real danger, showing les doucettes, indeed documents, proving that they have either British passports or documents showing that they're entitled to be evacuated.
Graham, Benedict, thank you for that. Graham, you're going to take us to the next story on the front page of The Guardian. Subject change here. And the story with the headline, COVID toll of 8 million denied NHS mental health care.
Yes, so this is the latest coverage about the quality of NHS care that we're getting in the UK in light of the coronavirus pandemic. The Guardian reports an estimated 8 million people from England with mental health problems can't get specialist help because they're not considered sick enough to qualify. The figure was drawn up by mental health trusts and NHS providers, and The Guardian says it underlines the gap between the growing need for help with things like anxiety and depression, other mental health issues, while the NHS obviously continues to struggle. The waiting list for NHS mental health care stands at 1.6 million people, including 374,000 under 18s. Obviously, the GPs have been under untold pressure throughout this entire pandemic, and now we've got additional things like the shortage of blood vials and etc. So this is just another thing, but obviously 8 million people, I don't need to do the maths for anyone to say it's an enormous issue, and something that it's only going to go, it's only going in one direction.
You've actually taken me to the front page of the Daily Mail. Before I cross up back to Benedict, Graham, the Daily Mail talks about GPs who see only half of their patients in person. What's the situation like in your patch in around Birmingham?
Well, it's very similar. It's worth saying that in Birmingham, as many as 50% of people haven't completed the vaccine. 50% haven't had the second vaccine, and we've got huge swathes of areas where people are majority unvaccinated. So, I mean, so the Daily Mail's coverage talks about the fact that less than half of patients get to see their GP face to face in the country now. It talks about the fact that it was something like 80% before COVID. Again, it's talked about the shortage of blood vials and so on. It's an unenviable task for the NHS, and we all know that they've kind of been heroes that have guided us through it. But what we're seeing now is an NHS that's being stretched to its absolute. I mean, if I'm honest, I'm not scandalised by the idea that less than half of GPs are having face-to-face. The concern really is how we can best use their expertise, and given the backdrop of all these things we're talking about, then often I would have thought a Zoom call might be the appropriate response, really.
That's a point, isn't it? Valid point, Benedict. Under what we're going through at the moment, I mean, does the fact that only half of the patients are seen in person, how did that take you, that strike you, that headline?
That they're not being seen in person, I'm, alas, well acquainted with because of at least two family members who have various needs that have evolved over the last 18 months or so, as in other families. The fact that in some areas 1 in 10 people are waiting 3 weeks for any GP appointment, and the fact that the NHS is struggling. We're in August. We haven't even begun the flu season and the winter season. This is really taking such a toll on the NHS. And of course, extraordinary individuals going, beyond their hours and really doing everything they can to try and make a difference. But it still feels like a COVID NHS. And I know that things are being missed. And I know that the NHS is doing its very best. And we're very lucky that we live in a country where it's free to go to the NHS. It's free to go to see your GP or to have a virtual appointment. But 3 weeks for a GP appointment. No wonder the A&E, which unfortunately I've been for family reasons to a lot in the last 6 months, are so overburdened. I think we need more nurses, we need more GPs. The ones I've met are just everyday heroes.
Yeah. Graham, back to the Telegraph, Daily Telegraph, and proposals to protect children on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Telegraph reports that the social media companies are they'll have compulsory age checks put upon them, things like passports or biometric tests or fingerprint analysis. This is because the idea is supposed to be that there's supposed to be an age limit, of 13 to use social media sites. I think I can tell you on the basis of having children at school that sites like TikTok and so on are certainly frequented by children under the age of 13 fairly regularly. Rachel de Souza, the commission, the children's commissioner, is the person who's behind this. She's been speaking to the Daily Telegraph and warned that they would either have to sign up to a strong age verification voluntarily or face legislation forcing them to do so. And conveniently, this is already the case in Germany and in France.
We haven't got long left on this, I'm afraid, Benedict, but we'll be back again at 11:30. We'll get your thoughts, hopefully, on this story again. But for now, I'm going to say thank you, Benedict Paviot of France 24, de rien, and also to Graham Brown. Thank you very much. Your first outing with us on the BBC Papers. It's been a delight. We'll see you again at 11:30. Thank you both. Thank you. And thank you for watching us here on BBC News. Do stay with us. We've got plenty more coming up right here.